Diplomatic talks in Ukraine last until dawn, a day after 100 may have died. By early Friday morning, the lone positive point was that, for the time being, Ukraine's cycle of political and physical infighting was not then at its bloodiest point, as it had been hours earlier. Opposition medics said that 100 protesters died Thursday in clashes with police, when gunfire was unleashed. The government places the toll much lower. The health ministry puts the total death toll since Tuesday at 77. 26 of them had been previously reported for Tuesday alone. Another 577 people have been injured. 369 of those were hospitalized, the ministry said. The foreign minister of Germany, France, and Poland met with Ukraine President Viktor Yanukovych and with the opposition overnight. After dawn, Poland's top diplomat Radoslaw Kurowski tweeted, "After negotiations through the night, talks ended at 7:20. Prodded by the foreign diplomats, the key players were talking about not just a bandage for the violence, but also a more long-term political solution and maybe the beginnings of healing. Yet the facts of the last 3 months, and particularly the last week, show that it's way too early to celebrate or savor any peace. There have been 2 truces since Sunday. Each of them collapsed suddenly into carnage centered in Kiev's Maidan, or Independence Square. The latest bloodshed was also the worst since the unrest began. CNN crews at the scene reported that as security forces were moving away from the area after the latest truce, a group of protesters pursued them throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails. Demonstrators did this all under a sky blackened by smoke from their burning barricades, with at least one of them firing toward police lines with a shotgun. Security forces appeared to fight back with automatic weapons and at least one sniper rifle. In video shot by Radio Free Europe, men wearing what appeared to be government uniforms fired at unseen targets with automatic rifles and a sniper rifle with a telescopic sight. CNN could not immediately confirm their target. Another video shot by CNN shows a medic trying to help a man on the ground being felled by gunfire. "I'm cleaning blood from the floor and I'm crying because it is really hard for me," said a man named Anton, who was volunteering at a protest medical clinic set up in a hotel. Renewed violence. Interior Minister Vitaly Zakharchenko said the violence had been provoked exclusively by the opposition leaders, echoing an earlier statement from President Viktor Yanukovych's office accusing protesters of breaking the truce. The opposition used the negotiation period to buy time, to mobilize and get weapons to protesters, the statement from the president's office said. However, a doctor volunteering to treat protesters, Olga Bogomolets accused government force of shooting to kill, saying she had treated 13 people she believed had been targeted by professional simpers. They were shot directly to their hearts, their brain, and to their neck, she said. They didn't give any chance to doctors for us to save lives. CNN could not independently confirm Bogomolets' claim of simper fire. At the hotel that had been converted into a tragedy center, bodies covered in bloodied sheets lay on the floor. Orthodox priests prayed over them. The Interior Ministry admitted Thursday that its forces used firearms, explaining that it only did so to protect unarmed police who were in danger. Ukraine's parliament later passed a resolution that security forces should stop using guns, something that's already illegal for protesters, back off from their positions around Maidan and denounce the anti-terror operation that had been announced earlier. But whether this Thursday night resolution, which doesn't need the president's signature, has an impact remains to be seen. In a statement that appeared in increased pressure on protesters, the Interior Ministry said it reserved the right to use force to free about 70 police officers it said had been taken hostage Thursday by protesters. However, a number of people purporting to be police officers appeared on Ukrainian television, saying they had joined protesters of their own free will. It wasn't clear whether these claiming to be police officers were among those allegedly taken hostage. There was no sign of any captives when CNN crew went Thursday night to where they were thought to be held. A human rights group earlier claimed that any police who'd been held against their will had been released. In one way, at least Kiev got back to a semblance of normality Thursday. In addition to announcing his resignation from Ukraine's ruling party, the city's mayor, Volodymyr Marchenko, reopened the city's mass transit system, which government officials had shut down to prevent protesters from reaching Independence Square. But the unrest wasn't just in Kiev. Anti-government protesters have also hit the streets in Lviv, about 540 kilometers west of Kiev, near the Polish border. Among other locals, such sentiment is particularly prevalent in western Ukraine, which is more likely to side with Europe and against Yanukovych. Ukraine's east, meanwhile, has tended to support him and closer ties to Russia. The people gathering here represent every demographic of the city, said Jason Francisco, an Emory University professor who was one of many to submit CNN in reports from Lviv. It is fair to say that the city is virtually entirely behind the opposition, and this accounts for perhaps the most conspicuous thing about the situation here. The security presence is virtually non-existent. Roots of the crisis. The violence inflames a crisis that started in November, when Yanukovych reversed a decision to sign a trade deal with the European Union and instead turned toward Russia. Ukraine's population has long been divided between historic loyalties to Europe and its eastern neighbor. The political strife has since ballooned well beyond that one issue, however, including the opposition's pressing constitutional reforms and to shift powers away from the president and to parliament. And the bloodshed this gets weak had gotten the world's attention. British Prime Minister David Cameron, for instance, talked it by phone Thursday with his Polish counterpart as well as Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and U.S. President Barack Obama also discussed the Ukraine. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden talked late Thursday with Yanukovych, who has also been in touch with Putin and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. In comments Thursday, the UN leader called for genuine dialogue and said he was appalled by the use of firearms by both the police and protesters, even as he stressed it is crucial, especially that authorities exercise restraint. Russia, for one, has said it will send a mediator there at Yanukovych's request to negotiate with the opposition. But the Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, said his government doesn't believe the opposition wants to dialogue. He accused protest leaders of invading government facilities as a build-up to a takeover of parliament. We think that this attempt to execute a violent coup should stop, he said. Contrast that opinion to those expressed by Western officials, who have generally put more of the blame and the responsibility on the Ukraine government. U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pat told CNN on Thursday that extremes on both sides are gathering strength because of the instability. Even then, Pat said it's very clear that for the United States, the preponderance of the responsibility rests with the President Yanukovych. Our position is that President Yanukovych needs to lead his country into a new future, and he needs to do so through the vehicle of a new government. Change to the constitution and the political order. The instability extends, too, to Ukraine's military. After its leader was replaced Wednesday by Yanukovych, there have been no indications Ukrainian troops have been involved in the violence, having rather moved to protect their own facilities and weaponry. U.S. military spokesman John Kirby said. At the same time, the Ukrainian military's new leadership has been unresponsive to U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel's attempts to communicate with them, according to Kirby. Diplomatic efforts underway. After meeting in urgent session in Brussels, European Union officials agreed to freeze the assets of Ukrainians deemed responsible for the violence, and to prevent them from traveling into the European Union. The organization said in a statement, "There is widespread horror in the European Union as well as in the United Kingdom at the scale of the loss of innocent life and the events of the last 48 hours." British Foreign Minister William Hague said. The move comes the day after the United States announced it wouldn't give visas to 20 people, including government officials, tied to the unrest. Washington is also preparing an order to freeze assets of Ukrainians who are believed to be involved in the crackdown. A senior administration official said Thursday. It's likely President Barack Obama will sign the order later in the day, but his administration is closely watching diplomatic efforts on the ground to make sure such a move won't be counterproductive, the administration official said. Late Thursday, Secretary of State John Kerry called for the violence to stop and placed a bulk of the blame on one side. "We unequivocally condemned the use of force against civilians by security forces, and urged that those forces be withdrawn immediately," he said in a statement. He said Washington had already started implementing sanctions over the violence and directed an admonition at Yanukovych. "There is no time for brinksmanship or gamesmanship," Kerry said. "President Yanukovych must undertake serious negotiations with opposition leaders immediately." The State Department also issued a travel warning to U.S. citizens, advising them to defer travel to the Ukraine due to the violence. The foreign ministers of Germany, France, and Poland met Thursday in Kiev with opposition leaders and Yanukovych. They had planned to attend the Brussels meeting, but talks went longer than expected, a German foreign ministry spokeswoman told CNN. Later Thursday, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski said via Twitter that the hours-long talks involving all sides had led to some progress, but important differences remain. These comments came as Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said there is a proposal before Yanukovych for elections this year. The formation of a new government within 10 days of that election and revisions to the constitution by this summer, according to a statement from Tusk's office. Pat, the U.S. ambassador, also said it was his understanding that Yanukovych had opened up to the idea of early elections. Russia's foreign ministry appeared to criticize Western diplomatic efforts. According to a report by Russian state news agency RIA Novosti, the ongoing attempts to obtrusively intervene from outside, threat with sanctions, or trying to influence the situation in any other ways are inappropriate and can't lead to anything good but can only aggravate the confrontation. The report quoted spokesman Alexander Lukashevich. Analysts warned there was little that outside pressure could do, especially if the Ukrainian military gets involved on the side of the government cracking down on protesters. My own hunch, said Council on Foreign Relations President Richard Hassis, is this is going to continue to escalate. Thai Prime Minister denies corruption allegations over rice program. Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has denied allegations that she failed to heed warnings of possible corruption in the rice subsidy program, whose recent problems have stoked anger among farmers in the country's rural heartland. The controversy over the rice program has deepened the political crisis in which Thailand has been mired for months. Thailand's National Anti-Corruption Commission's NACC says Tuesday that it was bringing charges against Yingluck over the program, which pledged to pay farmers well above the market rate for their rice, but has run into financial problems. The commission has summoned Yingluck, whose government is already under pressure from month-long protests in Bangkok, to appear February 27th to be notified of the charges. I wish to assure you that as I have served my duty with righteousness and contrary to the charges brought against me by the NACC, I have done nothing wrong, Yingluck said in a statement Thursday. The Anti-Corruption Commission's charges, which accuse Yingluck of ignoring warnings of corruption in the program, could eventually lead to the suspension of the Prime Minister from all political positions. Though I may be charged in this criminal case and may have to give up my position in accordance to the wishes of those who want to topple my government, I will still lend my full cooperation and give necessary information to the NACC, she said. Yingluck insists that the rice subsidy program, introduced in 2011, has been successful and benefited farmers. But critics say it has washed large amounts of public funds trying to please rural voters, hurting exports and leaving the government with large stockpiles of rice it can sell without losing money. The program has encountered intensified difficulties after an election earlier this month was disrupted by anti-government demonstrators and failed to deliver a conclusive result. The situation has left Inlock's weakened caretaker government struggling to operate effectively and ensure payments are made to rice farmers. Angry farmers. Problems with the subsidy program have angered many farmers, normally an important component of Inlock's support base. Groups of farmers have held protests in recent weeks after not being paid for their rice. About 3,000 farmers from central Thailand spent Thursday night camped out on the outskirts Bangkok after traveling on tractors, trailers, and quad bikes. They had threatened to take their protest to the city's main airport, Suvarnabhumi, if they didn't get paid what they owed. But the leader of the group of farmers, Chada Thaisens, said Friday that they would be heading home later in the day after the government informed they would be paid earlier next week. The farmers said their planned protest wasn't political, unlike the anti-government demonstrators in central Bangkok. They say they don't want to see the ouster of Inlock, but they do want their money. Long-running protests. The tensions over the rice program come against the backdrop of the protest by groups affiliates with Inlock's political opponents. Those demonstrations calling for Inlock to step down have been taking place in central Bangkok since November and have been plagued by outbreaks of deadly violence. Earlier this week, police tried to clear demonstrators out some protest sites, but the efforts resulted in violent clashes that left 5 people dead, including 1 police officer, and dozens of wounded. Police have since suspended their attempts to censor the protest sites for the time being, and a court ruled Wednesday that the government can use force and weapons against peaceful unarmed protesters. The protest leader says they want to rid the country of Inlock and her wealthy brother, the deposed former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. Thaksin, who lives in exile, faces a corruption conviction, which he says was politically motivated. If he returns to Thailand, political opponents said Inlock, who convincingly won elections in 2011, is simply Thaksin's puppet, an allegation she has repeatedly denied. The protests were sparked in November by Inlock's government's botched attempt to pass an amnesty bill that would have paved the way for her brother's return to the political fray in earnest. The protesters say they want Inlock's government replaced by an unelected People's Council, which would oversee electoral and political changes. WhatsApp. 10 other things Facebook could have bought with $19 billion US. Facebook's acquisition of the hugely popular messaging service WhatsApp for $19 billion US is one of the largest tech deals in history. It dwarfs Facebook's acquisition of Instagram for $1 billion in 2012, and even that was considered an astonishing number by many. Since $19 billion is a sum most of us can hardly comprehend, and because it's fun to imagine, we came up with a list of other things Mark Zuckerberg and his team could have purchased for $19 billion. What would you do if you had that kind of money? World's 10 most spectacular university buildings. If the memory of your university is a somewhat hazy mix of missed lectures, cheap food, empty beer cans, and cold concrete classrooms, you won't recognize this list. Hamburg-based architectural data company and Process recently released a report on what it's calling the world's most spectacular university buildings. Lecture halls at dazzling heights, libraries with glass domed roofs, or crooked seminar rooms with slanting walls. It is not just in the field of learning that universities have plenty to offer, but on an architectural level too, the report stated. The 10 buildings include Lomonosov Moscow State University, the world's tallest university building at 240 meters, Swanston Academic Building in Australia, which catches the eye with its wavy and jagged facade, and Brentfield Hall at Cornell University in the United States, which is almost entirely windowless. The report also describes how old-school university buildings are gradually being replaced. One by one, chunky relics of the 60s and 70s are being torn down. It states, citing the demolition of the AFE turn in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, which was brought down earlier this month in Europe's largest inner city control blasting. 20 questions. What's behind Ukraine's political crisis? For 3 months, they've staked their claim to Kiev's Maidan, or Independence Square, and to Ukraine itself. We will leave only when you pull closer to the European Union, when you change the constitution, when you alter the government's power structure. They have loudly insisted. But why? Why have the thousands of protesters staked their lives, seemingly on their desire for political change? And why has the government resisted their calls so vehemently? Let's take a look. First, what prompted the protest? At the heart of the protest is a trade pact. For a year, President Viktor Yanukovych insisted he was intent on signing a historic political and trade agreement with the European Union. But on November 21st, he decided to suspend talks with the EU. Second, what would the pact have done? The deal, the EU's Eastern Partnership, would have created closer political ties and generated economic growth. It would have opened borders to trade and set the stage for modernization and inclusion, supporters of the pact said. Third, why did Yanukovych backpedal? He had his reasons. Chief among them was Russia's opposition to it. Russia threatened its much smaller neighbor with trade sanctions and steep gas bills if Ukraine forged ahead. If Ukraine didn't, and instead joined a Moscow-led customs union, it would get deep discounts on natural gas, Russia said. Fourth, were there any other reasons? Yes, a more personal one. Yanukovych also was facing a key EU demand that he was unwilling to meet. Free former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, his bitter political opponent. 2 years ago, she was found guilty of abuse of office in a Russian gas deal and sentenced to 7 years in prison. In a case widely seen as politically motivated, her supporters say she needs to travel abroad for medical treatment. Fifth, what happened next? Many Ukrainians were outraged. They took to the streets, demanding that Yanukovych sign the EU deal. Their numbers swelled. The demonstrations drew parallels to Ukraine's 2004 Orange Revolution, which booted Yanukovych, then a prime minister, from office. Sixth, who's heading the opposition? It's not just one figure, but a coalition. The best-known figure is Vitaly Klitschko. He's a former world champion boxer, just like his brother Waldemar. Klitschko heads the Ukrainian Democratic Alliance for Reform's party, but the opposition bloc goes well beyond Klitschko and the UDAR. There's also Arseny Yantescu. More on him later. Seventh, how did Yanukovych react? In a way that inflamed passions further. He flew to Moscow, where he and Russian President Vladimir Putin announced Russia would buy $15 billion in Ukrainian debt and slash the price Kiev pays for its gas. And then, when the demonstrations showed no signs of dying down, he adopted a sweeping anti-protest law. Eighth, why did the anti-protest law say? Eighth, what did the anti-protest law say? The law barred people from wearing helmets and masks to rallies and from setting up tents or sound equipment without prior police permissions. This sparked concerns it could be used to put down demonstration and deny people the right to free speech, and clashes soon escalated. The demonstrators took over City Hall for the better part of 3 months. Ninth, but wasn't the law repealed? Yes, ultimately it was, amid intense pressure. deputies loyal to Yanukovych backtracked and overturned it. But by then, the protest has become about something much bigger: constitutional reform. 10th. What change in the Constitution did they want to see? The protesters want to see a change in the government's overall power structure. They feel that too much power rests with Yanukovych and not enough with parliaments. 11th. What did the government do? In late January, the president offered a package of concessions under which Yantescu, the opposition leader, would have become the prime minister, and under the president's offer, being able to dismiss the government. He also offered Kivsko the post of deputy prime minister on humanitarian issues. He also agreed to a working group looking at changes to the constitution, but the opposition refused. 12th. Why did the opposition pass on the offer? The concessions weren't enough to satisfy them. They said Yanukovych had hardly loosened his grip on the government, nor had he seemingly reined in authorities' approach to protesters. We're finishing what we started, Yatsenyuk said. 13th. But over the weekend it seemed things were getting better, weren't they? Yes, on Sunday, protesters vacated Kiev's city hall, unblocked a mayor street, and left other government buildings in exchange for the government's dropping charges against those arrested. But any breakthrough was a distant memory by Tuesday. 14th. Why? What happened Tuesday? The opposition wanted to introduce amendments in Parliament that would have limited the president's power and restored the Constitution to what it was in 2004. But the Speaker of Parliament refused to allow it. Bloody clashes followed. 15th. Who was to blame for the clashes? Depends on whom you ask. The government pointed the finger at protesters. The opposition, in turn, blamed the government. Regardless, it was the bloodiest day of protest up to that point. 28 people died. 16th. Wasn't there a truce called? Yes, the government and opposition agreed on a truce late Wednesday, but it barely took hold, and blood was flowing again Thursday. 17th. What caused the fresh clashes? Gunfire erupted Thursday at Maidan, or Independence Square, which has been ground zero for anti-government protesters. At least 20 people died. It's unclear what prompted the gunfire. Again, finger-pointing followed. The government said protesters broke the truce. The protesters said the government did. 18th. So what happens next? Top international diplomats have been trying to resolve the crisis. There's also been talk of sanctions. 19th. Will sanctions help? Analysts warn there's little that outside pressure could do, especially if the Ukrainian military gets involved on the side of the government. 20th. What's the takeaway here? Street protests that started in November over the trade pact have swelled into something much bigger, a demand that the president loosen his grip on power and the constitution being changed. As a result, the Eastern European country is in the midst of a wave of anti-government protest, the likes of which it hasn't seen in 10 years. There's something else. Ukraine, the biggest frontier nation separating Russia and the European Union, is something of a pawn between Russia and the West. The EU and the US think Russia wields a lot of influence. Russia denies it. One open-ended question is how much worse it will all get. My own hunch, said Richard Harsis, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, is this is going to continue to escalate.